Hey, everybody. If you're listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of this episode of The Shift with Doug McKenty. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the show in order to access the full feature-length versions of the podcast, as well as have access to the members forum, where we discuss potential topics and interviews and dive deep into the overall concept of The Shift. For only $6 a month, not only do you get the full-length episodes, but also an opportunity to co-create with me, your host, Doug McKenty, the future of the show. Go to www.theshiftnow.com or patreon.com/theshift and sign up today in order to help make the shift possible. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening to The Shift. I'm your host. My name is Doug McKenty. This 111th episode was recorded on February 22nd, 2022. My guest on the show today is Jack of all trades, Mary Lin. Mary and I got in touch after my initial series on the Substack blog, The Populist Papers, raised questions concerning political ideologies and communication. Focusing on a particular dispute within independent media circles that typified in my mind the paucity of miscommunication encountered while engaging in political conversation, my articles focused on the need for unification within the independent community. Though Mary disagreed with my assessment of the dispute, her response was non-judgmental and open-minded, in great contrast to the many disparaging comments from those on the other side of the debate. We then began a long conversation concerning the nature of appropriate dispute resolution techniques. It turned out that Mary has been working on a concept she calls sovereign communication. Her process combines the best of logical reasoning and critical thinking skills with a high level of emotional intelligence that together provide a safe space to engage in productive conversation. These discussions invite all participants along a path towards further healthy individuation. Not only can those engaged pursue logical dialogue, but they can also undergo an experience which recognizes the importance of emotional healing as well. Essentially, the concept is founded on the notion that truly individuated persons can engage in a dispassionate dialogue without attachment to the outcome that adheres strictly to the principles of logical discourse. If attached, however, the interlocutor will invariably get triggered by facts and reasoning that do not conform to the attachment. This results in the use of logical fallacies employed to avoid the emotional pain caused by an attachment to an unjustifiable concept. Sovereign communication recognizes these triggers as a coping mechanism indicative of past trauma. At this point, the conversation must end so the trauma can be processed or shift to a different topic. Though nonviolent communication techniques provide a safe space, they can often lead to unhealthy commiseration between parties, resulting in stagnation. Sovereign communication demands the discipline of logic while simultaneously maintaining a respect for emotional boundaries. Over time, these techniques not only illuminate conversations with the light of truth, but help heal emotional wounds presenting as unjustifiable beliefs utilized as coping mechanisms designed to avoid emotional pain. Perhaps in this way, we can overcome the many powerful political beliefs which only serve to divide family and community, and find a way forward unified by the idea that we can discover solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems through this process of conscious dialogue. Hopefully, this interview will not just be about sovereign communication, but will also serve as an example of just how such communication can work. Though Mary currently is not promoting a personal work or website, she asks those interested in this content to check out her passion project, the Community Exchange System, at www.community-exchange.org, which offers a worldwide talent exchange network providing economic value outside the dollar-denominated economy. As always, find out more about The Shift, sign up for the newsletter, and subscribe for feature-length versions of each episode by going to www.theshiftnow.com. You can find video versions of the show on Rockfin, Odyssey, and YouTube, and audio versions at all your favorite podcast hosting sites. Look for my blog on Substack under the Populist Papers, or contact me at Doug McKenty on Facebook or at dmckenty on Twitter. If you like what you're hearing, please like, subscribe, and share this content on your favorite social media platform. Enjoy this conversation with Mary Lin. I'd like to thank her for agreeing to this interview, and thank you for helping to make the shift. Hey, everybody, and welcome to this 111th episode of The Shift. I'm joined today by Mary Lin. She is an artist and activist out of Boulder County, Colorado. I first got in touch with her because, as some of you may know, my first couple of blog posts were about this dispute that has been going on within the scene that sort of typified a miscommunication that so many of us, many people are having, many activists are having right now. And in my drive for trying to figure out a messaging that can unify the scene, maybe start some kind of real political action that can function to try to turn the tide against the things that we all know have been happening these last couple of years, and this totalitarian tiptoe that's been happening for such a long time. Mary actually had a different opinion about that dispute than I did, but she was so polite in the way that she had a conversation with me through social media that I thanked her for the way that she was communicating about it. And we ended up having a phone call. And it turns out that Mary has been involved in developing what she calls sovereign communication. And I wanted to have her on the show because to me, this is probably the most important topic that we can be having right now. There's so much, especially on these social media platforms, there's so much conflict going on. People who have a disagreement about this aspect of their worldview or that aspect of their worldview, or just we all are familiar with the general left-right paradigm, which causes all kinds of division. How do we get over it? Well, the only way to get over it is to have conversation about it, to have conversation where we don't get triggered, where we don't fly off the handle and start calling each other names and building straw men and going down those roads. And that is just, I mean, that's 90% of a social media conversation, it seems like these days. So I'm happy to have Mary on, and really I think we're going to dive deep. If it's half as good as that first phone call that we have, this is going to be an incredible interview. So hope you're looking forward to this conversation as much as I am. Hi, Mary. How's it going today? Do you want to just let people know about a little bit about your history and your past and why you got into this concept of sovereign communication?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks for having me on, Doug. If this conversation is anything like the last two, we'll be glad we're recording this time because we get to sit.
I know.
So I'm sort of a mental generalist. I started by going to art school, and then I ended up studying molecular biology and briefly being involved in research, which was a whole topic that's now very related to what's happening in the world. And then I went out and started businesses in the arts, and became an opera singer and composer and did all kinds of stuff. At some point, I got a master's degree in counseling and human relations, an MED in counseling and human relations. And I've worked much of my life in communications. I've been a journalist. And I use words and communication very, very intentionally in my artwork, in the operas and the poetry that I've written and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And as things were really heating up in the world, around 2015, we had just produced a bunch of operas, and then my husband and I moved to Boulder County, and we renovated a house with this big meeting room where we could do all kinds of things, have meetings, do opera and singing events. And I started looking at the world and thinking, what if I focused my art form for the near future, or at least for the next thing, on how can I create a beautiful community and world? And I was curious. With the scientific background, I was curious. I set myself a hypothesis that to test, which is how satisfied and how satisfying and how enjoyable will it be for me to focus on activism in creating a beautiful world for myself and my family and my husband in my community as my next art form. So for better or worse, that's what I've been doing for 15 years. And at that point, I had just written an opera that I didn't realize it, but I had just put in a lot of tongue-in-cheek, outrageous ideas that I didn't realize at that point were conspiracy theories that I just pulled out of the ether. And then I decided I'm going to study conspiracy theory for my next opera. And next thing I knew,
Yeah.
I was and so there's a part of me that is at root sort of philosophically, we talked about this, what I consider sort of a neo-stoic. I'm interested in neo-stoicism, and so I try to maintain sort of a sense of the observer, which is also true, I think, very much for a lot of artists, to sort of like step back, and the scientist observing and saying, what's really going on here?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I found out that was going on is that we are in a very low ebb in our actual technical skills of communication with one another. And I've noticed this in all of the groups that I've been involved with. And because I'm interested in principles and in inspiring people to do what they love and to create constructive things together. I know people across the whole political spectrum, and at different times I've been progressive, been curious about conservative values around the economy, and I'm more libertarian probably now, but all of us, all of us have the same problems with listening to one another and feeling our own strength, our own sovereignty when we engage in conversation with one another. So I've been looking at what are the underlying principles of a truly self-actualized, sovereign. There's lots of different ways that you can compassionately rooted, enlightened. There's lots of different labels that you can put on somebody who knows themselves, knows what they want to communicate, and can give the other persons or party an ultimate kind of base or foundation of recognized integrity when you engage the conversation.
Yeah, it's so true and so difficult to find in this world. I mean, that was the thing that attracted me to wanting to have this conversation about this topic, because I eventually ended up writing this essay called Dialectic and Dialogue. I've been trying to understand why people are so interested in this conflict and this debate and being right. And it was actually through the process of writing that essay that I had understood Stoicism, but it sort of clicked in me that like Stoicism really applies here, because logic can be used, I think should be used, if I can use that word, as a form of personal cultivation to make sure that you're on the right path. And instead, we live in this world that thinks that there's this dialectic that there's an if or a then, and you've got to duke it out to figure out who's right. And it's like that's just a control mechanism at the end of the day. Like, well, if I'm right, then I can tell you what to do. I mean, that's the world we've been living in.
And that's not actually a dialectic. Dia means two or between.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting we're having this conversation today because I do numerology, and this is your 111th podcast.
Right.
And it's on 2/22/2022. So where that adds up to a 12, all of those twos, which are all about individual relationship communication. So the 111 adds up to a 3, which is about creating communication, the triad of communication. And then we have all of those twos adding up to a 12, which reduces to a 3, which is also about engaging in constructive communication.
Nice. It's all coming together.
So here we are. Here we are in a very auspicious day to be talking about this. But if we look at all of the twos, we have all of these dyads of people engaging in dialectic, and how do we bring them together into a larger dialectic? And there's got to be a structure for that. From years of, I learned a great deal about conversation from being online, especially on Facebook, and having conversations. And I found it so incredibly tiresome to see conversations devolving into insinuation, attack, passive aggression, and then all of the logical fallacies, the ad hominem, the straw man. It impelled me, as somebody who's essentially a Stoic, and I didn't know that I was a Stoic when I started this, to study logic and logical fallacy sort of as an adjunct to the philosophy of science that I had studied when I was younger, before I was, working in molecular biology. And I discovered that the reason why the conversations are so terribly tiresome and so terribly boring is that they're fallacious. They're based in logical fallacy. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to be a sovereign communicator, learning at least the basic set of logical fallacies is incredibly important. So you have to start with, like, let's just listen. What's the first thing that you see in conversations with people all the time? There's two that just really jump to mind in terms of the logical fallacies.
Well, the straw man.
Straw man. People act
And
incredulous and outraged, and they restate something that you never said, and then they attack you and accuse you of being an immoral person for having,
yep,
excuse me, there's something on my screen, for having said that thing.
yep. The ad hominem. That would be my second
That's the
guess.
second.
Yeah.
Those are the two. Ad hominem and ad hominem in any formal debate setting. As soon as you get to personal attacks on somebody's character or insinuations about them personally, doxing would be in that category of anything that's a personal attack. Invalidates you and you forfeit the argument. So just knowing how to say to people, I hold a high standard in conversation. I don't discourse with people who engage in logical fallacy. You've just used the two most obvious and cheapest tricks, straw man and ad hominem. Would you like to come back? Here's, when you learned something, here's a link.
Right.
Which usually just annoys people. But what I found over time is that I had a significant following of people who wanted to learn these things, and I kept sharing the links with them, and they started using them and then saying, Mary, this is a good example of how you argued that, and sharing that. And I had other friends who were doing the same thing. My friend Bob Bose, who's the economist, who he talks about public banking and constitutional banking, one of the topics we've talked about, and is a really astute political, geopolitical observer and analyst and commentator where we are. He does that to expose trolls and get rid of them immediately. He says, okay, you've this logical fallacy, this, and this. And then when they're out of things to say, he just posts a link about the latest research on how many trolls of what type are trolling specific topics. And then, that troll is, and then you can just block that troll, but you have the evidence for people to see.
Yeah.
So, but that's not a heart-centered approach. That's a logical part. And of course, logic is a big part of the Stoic path and of learning how to be a functional and useful person. So in sovereign communication, you have to go further and you have to say, okay, you have to do the self-examination part of who am I, and am I just a mind? Am I just a quarrelsome entity? Or am I also a heart and a soul and
Right.
a creator and a sensitive being?
Well, one of the things that just popped into my mind as I was hearing you talk about the logical fallacies, because it is so logical, but then conversely, that's also a really important, healthy way to understand how to set emotional boundaries on someone.
Exactly.
I mean, if they're just hammering you, making fun of you, talking garbage about you, if that's where the conversation has devolved, it's a healthy emotional boundary. You don't need to take that
Exactly.
abuse. You need to say, hey,
No,
if you're not willing to engage in this logical conversation with me that could be beneficial to both of us, then I'm sorry, but I'm not going to stand for this kind of behavior,
exactly. And I find that it's often young men who are trying to find a way to sort of like pit themselves against the world.
Mhm.
And I found that some of them, are there once the testosterone gets going and they want to, butt horns and, knock something over, they become really, really, really angry. But some of them, I've noticed, really pick up and start learning the logical fallacy tools and being able to use them successfully. And it's very difficult to do anything in the world but be obedient if you are not able to engage in critical analysis. And you cannot engage in critical analysis if you don't understand logic.
Right.
And it does help you to maintain that sense of emotional control. But the other part of being able to have the emotional control is you do have to understand rhetoric. And you understand this better than me. As I've mentioned, I'm an autodidact when it comes to philosophy, so I just have what I've gleaned. But I understand rhetoric as somebody who's been in communications as all of the arts of persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
All of the arts that get get past the logic and get into your fears, your desires, your archetypal yearnings, your recognitions of something that you can't really put your finger on because it's really coming from your subconscious or your unconscious. So if you're going to be a sovereign communicator, you have to really understand rhetoric as well. Maybe you can speak
Well,
about that to some degree
yeah,
as the philosopher in the room.
right. I actually want to take a step back before we get there, because the thing that first, I just want to recommend to people to look up the trivium method, where you can find
That's right.
all of the logical fallacies. And this was actually the sort of the historically the way that people were educated. They were educated to critically think for themselves. Um, and so I wanted to talk for just a second about the difference between understanding this critical thinking and use of logic in this way, and understanding the logical fallacies, but then indoctrination, because I think
Yes.
that's where our education system is going today, and that's why I think so many people are incapable. Now, they haven't been trained into how to actually critically think. They've been trained into how to be indoctrinated, and it's become like a terribly bad habit in everyone. And that's why
Right.
they're so easily swayed by rhetoric that is attacking their emotional soft spots instead of engaging in their critical thinking.
Well, yes. So in the trivium, I knew that you were going to get there because obviously I was speaking the trivium. In the
Hmm.
trivium, the first three arts that you must master as a student before you're able to move on to the quadrivium, the first three arts are grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So grammar is in and of itself an intrinsic logic that we all know. So when you teach grammar, you realize that there are rules. And when you realize that there are rules and that there are sequential outcomes to those rules, um, then you are primed to be able to study logic. If you don't understand grammar, it's very difficult to converse, and it's
Right.
very difficult to feel that confidence in yourself as a sovereign, individuated being who has something to say. And this is why so many of the conservative and libertarian homeschooling programs, like Ron Paul's curriculum, are built around the trivium.
Yeah.
So, what was I going to say about that? Oh, yes. And so, once you've learned the trivium, the quadrivium, and the trivium lot of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, then you need to have sort of like, you have to understand your own motivations for how to use that. And so that's where self-examination comes in. So it almost seems to me that you can't present yourself in the world as a sovereign being without having disciplines of self-examination, and that can happen through many different ways. It can happen through a journaling process, through a dialectic with a friend, a conversation group. I really love Jordan Peterson's self-authoring process.
Hmm.
That's a great way to start doing the self-examination and understand who you really are and what it is that you actually want to be arguing for or against.
Right. I mean, and it's fascinating because you use the word individuated, and that is also the term that's used in psychology to talk about a healthy emotional person.
Exactly.
So what I love about these conversations with you is that we're seeing how logic and reason and critical thinking could actually be used as tools to balance yourself emotionally, to set healthy
Right.
boundaries, to
Exactly.
individuate yourself, to self-examine yourself so that you have a consistent belief system, and then to control your emotions so you don't get triggered,
Yes.
um, and engage in healthy dialogue with other people where you can help each other out to figure this stuff out. This is what it should all be
That's right.
about. It's so amazing how uh, the way people are trained into thinking is to not self-examine, to get triggered when
Yep.
somebody questions their belief system, and then not part think of the other person as as an enemy. It's
Right.
all this military metaphor, instead of somebody that you're interacting with as an ally who's helping you cultivate your own individuality.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up triggering because in sovereign communication, there needs to be a recognition of the other person as somebody who has ideas that you respect, but you also have to have the emotional component of respecting them as a soul, as a living being.
Hmm.
And there is that emotional sort of appreciation, which is embodied in things like nonviolent communication and various compassionate communication techniques. However, once that esteem has been established as a foundation, there's no real communication if you don't then start engaging logically and critically. What you have is commiseration, which is what happens between
Right.
victims.
Right.
So commiseration is great when somebody's traumatized or when you're just hanging out with your friends and you need to express and explore things. That is fantastic, but it is incomplete communication. And if commiseration always results in I'm triggered, I have to withdraw, or you need to emotionally protect me, everyone needs that sometimes, but it's an incomplete human being
Right.
who can only go to that place.
And it's become, I mean, we're hearing all of this about safe spaces, and I mean, it's become an actual,
Safe spaces are important. I need to honor everyone.
right.
Yes.
I hear that, but at the same time, I mean, there's got to be a balance between being an emotionally healthy person can handle a little constructive criticism
Right.
without getting triggered and requiring constantly going to the safe space. I mean, I'm glad that you bring it up as this term commiseration, because that does come up from a place of victimhood. So even if you engage in a nonviolent communication, if it devolves into commiseration, you're not actually addressing the root causes of the problem or building up the person who's been traumatized in a healing way that can help them become a stronger person.
Right. So I think it's important to have tools for dealing with your own trauma and your own triggering. One of the tools that I use is a lot of people use tapping, or stimming in various ways. And I think that is about what I've observed is from having practiced and studied and, just been exposed to a lot of different techniques of emotional healing. Many of them involve touching the body, thinking about the body, so that when you're in a triggered space, your emotions have a place to land in the body.
Hmm.
So if you're somebody who is easily triggered by things, then perhaps you should go do some EMDR or learn to haven. Havening is, using parasympathetic touch in a moment of stress. You can do something like this in any meeting and people aren't going to, think that you're a weirdo. Um,
Right.
this stuff, maybe not so much. They might really think that you're a little bit more Asperger's than you want to come off.
Right.
So yeah, having the tools that you need, and knowing that if you're going to go into a traumatic situation, setting somebody up to be your support team to debrief afterwards, so you don't have to devolve into panic. You can think, I can mentally make a note of this, and then I can talk about X. I'll talk about it with X later.
Right.
So setting up your techniques so that you can honor and embody yourself, and you're not just stuffing it, which, as I said, is the traditional view of what Stoicism is, but it's really inaccurate. It's not about stuffing your emotions. It's about being able to engage appropriately with the attitude of the observer and being able to continue your goals of study, self-examination, and service.
Right. Yeah. When I was writing the article, Dialogue and Dialectic, it occurred to me that I was starting to describe Stoicism, and so I looked it up.
Yeah.
Hadn't really checked it out in a while, and somehow the source that I landed on really talked about how they're using logic to control the emotions, um, but then to remain ethical and moral in the face of
Yeah.
powerful emotions that were sort of
Yes.
propelling them outside of the logical constraints. But it occurred to me just reading that sentence that they were talking about getting triggered. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
ancient, the ancient
Yep.
Roman way of talking about when
Right.
you get triggered and you get outside of your logical mind, and now you're in this space of fear that is not really in relation to what's going on now. It's a throwback to a past trauma, and you're feeling like you're in a past situation, and it just like suddenly it clicked to me that like, oh, this is a healthy use of logic to recognize
Right.
your triggers and then use the logical fallacies and your critical thinking skills to either back out of the conversation at that point and say, sorry, this is too triggering for me. I need to
Right.
go home and do some
And
tapping or
that's
some
sovereign. That's
meditation.
taking care of yourself. That's taking your,
Right.
that's knowing when to withdraw from the engagement
Yeah.
as a sovereign. It's interesting. I was just reading today, I looked up the word etiquette because I realized, well, what we're talking about in sovereign communication is a lot of it is etiquette. And I found the current, okay, there's 3 levels of definition. The current one is polite behavior in polite society. The one that was most common for the longest period of time is the rules of engagement between sovereigns.
Right.
And the origin of etiquette really means ticket, and it was the tickets that were put up at Versailles to keep the lazy nobles from cutting a path across the courtyards and ruining the grass.
Right. Classic. That's hilarious.
So this brings in the aspect of emotion, okay, and the aspect of I don't. When I was working at one of the universities that I worked at, we went through a whole big campus re-envisioning process, and we brought in landscape architects, and they talked about pathways of desire. And pathways of desire are when you study a project to see how you should be creating it for the maximal enjoyment and utility for the people who are using it, is you just sort of study it for a while. And if people look at the clock tower, which is where the cafe is, from the science building, and they want to make a beeline for it, and there's a square of grass there in the middle or a rose garden, they're going to just walk through the rose garden. That's the pathway of desire. So as a sovereign being, you need to know when you're really just going to walk across the grass and nobody's going to tell you not to do that, and you have to try and build that into your communication style. Right? So, for example, for me as a sovereign being, I do not at all I try to avoid situations where I have to stay in the rules of compassionate communication because they're very structured. I mean, of nonviolent communication,
Mm-hmm.
because that system is very structured and it's very orderly and it's very safe, and everyone is safe in that, but it's not playful. So I try to find people who I can josh with, and where our sovereign agreement is that we can kid each other, and I can, my friend John will come in and I'll be like, whoa, somebody really liked them because he's bald and he's just gotten his head shaved. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? That to me is my pathway of desire. I need and want playful communications. But
Sure.
you have to have those agreements with people, and you can get to them by kidding with somebody a little bit, and if they react, then you pull back and you say, I'm sorry, did I hit, and then try to talk to them, and they can either talk to you or, they decide that they're not going to deal with you. And that's difficult because you can't just say, I think you're an interesting person. I would like to discuss the rules of sovereign communication with you so we can be friends.
Right.
So you have to put out what's called putting out a bid. You have to sort of, in terms of a relationship, put out a little bid and see if it gets picked up. And then respond to it in the sovereign way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm loving about this concept is that it's about building logical strength and also about building
Yeah.
emotional strength. And I
Yeah.
just want, from my personal experience, I mean, when I was younger, when I had all that testosterone, I was
Oh,
really,
you're still young. I'm pretty
yeah,
sure you're younger than me.
I'm doing all right. um, I became, really enamored of the logical side of things, and
Yeah.
the emotional stuff was all like, that is confusing and crazy making, and I don't understand where that comes from. And I was studying philosophy, and I really wanted to just engage on this very logical level. And I noticed that for me, I could kind of separate my personal identity from the logical conversation I was having, and I would just try to, engage with other
Right.
people. But then so often over time, I kind of realized that it's threatening to other people
Yeah.
to just go straight into this logical conversation, and like you're trying to break down their point of view. And
Right.
now I get it. And as I got older, I was like, oh, guess what, my emotional self is actually really important. I carry it around with me everywhere I go, and it affects my entire life. So if I don't start paying
Yeah.
closer attention to this thing, I'm going to be in for a world of hurt. And now, I
You
see.
are wise. You are wise to have gone on that journey and to
Yeah.
be engaging those processes. So let me interview you a little bit. So
Mhm.
what are you doing to develop your emotional intelligence?
Well, it's very much like what you're talking about, like just having respect for the other person as a person, for being careful not to trigger them, and to have conversations sort of to the space where they're comfortable going and not going beyond that. But also, I mean, I do agree with you. I think that y- every person is different, and having respect for them as a sovereign being, and engaging with another person as a sovereign being, and then finding the people that are your friends, right? I mean, that you
Right.
can be playful with, and that don't get triggered by your uh
Or if they do, you can say,
particular
"Hey, what's
passion.
going on? What do you need from me?" And
Right.
they're sovereign enough to say, I need to not talk right now, or I need you to affirm that you're not trying to attack me or explain what you mean. And they can state their needs, even if it's raw and emotional and the kind of thing that you don't do in public because you don't want people to think that you're a baby,
Right. Right.
right? Or whatever judgment, or not a man or a wimp, or whatever the things that, but that they feel like they can do that, and they can sort of like decompensate, regress, whatever you want to say, go out of that facade, and sort of like have you help them to be in whatever state they're in for a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, what I really appreciate about this conversation and this concept of sovereign communication is that it helps you hone your logic, but also
Yeah,
strengthens your emotions. Like,
right.
because this is where, instead of thinking of reality, and this is where our culture, I think, has come to this place, and maybe we can even get into, I would say this is a characteristic of patriarchy. We can start kind of talking about
Ha,
some of the
patriarchy.
cultural archetypes here. But this idea that logic kind of, that it transcends or dominates the emotions are these dark underbelly. I mean, like I said, as a young man, the way I treated logic and
Hmm.
emotions, and have come to mature and understand, well, actually, you know, a healthy individuated life is harmonizes. And I think about the Taoism, the yin yang here. Like, instead of having, in fact, I've been thinking a lot lately about the dualism of our culture, the good and the bad, and separating these things out.
Right,
And like, the logic is dominating the bad, who's not using the good argument, and in this
right.
militaristic way, instead of the yin yang symbol that really typifies this notion that, like, health is balancing these two, and then strength is testing, kind of constantly testing both of them in this harmony, in a way where you can individuate yourself emotionally, make yourself
Yep.
stronger emotionally, and also refine your logic and your critical thinking skills, so that you have a higher awareness, and you're using this tool in a good way, in
Well, and this is
harmony with
where
your feelings
And
and the
this is where
feelings of
the
others.
playfulness comes in.
Mhm.
You're in an engagement with your friend. You have an agreement to engage, to test your wits, to test your battle of wits with each other. It's a wrestle, right? And so there needs to be an agreement that you're willing to do that, and people don't want to just. So, yeah, so engaging in a battle of wits, there sort of has to be, like a bow in, so that everybody knows what's happening.
Right.
And that's the sovereign thing. So people aren't like, whoa, I just want to, Netflix and chill. Don't bother me with all of that,
Right.
you know, all of that Aristotle business. I'm not here to systemize all of the world of information and knowledge and how we learn. I just want to watch Bruce Willis burn something down yet again,
Right.
or whatever. Um,
Well, I mean, that's what's so
So,
fast systematizing the world. This is exactly the kind of consciousness that we're up against with this whole technocratic takeover that we're sort of
right.
dealing with right now. So I think
Yep.
that's even another level on top of just we can have this conversation that can be so uh, just relational in terms of how you're
Yeah.
dealing with other people in your life, but then also the archetypes of all these concepts, they really apply to what's happening in the bigger system right now, on the
Right.
larger cultural scene. So,
Yes. And you mentioned, okay, so you mentioned the patriarchy. So,
right.
this is a really tough topic for me to get into because I'm a logical gal.
Yeah.
And but I look like just like a normal gal. There's like nothing especially masculine about me at all in the way that I look or really present myself. And I have four brothers. Um, and my dad was always like fixing cars and being an engineer, and I just loved the logical like doing stuff, right?
Mhm.
So I think that the patriarchy as an archetype of the lineage and the transmission of what's good about men and the positive things that men can do in culture, and as a lineage that's passed down positively, I think it's a great thing. And there's hierarchies in all of nature. You cannot deny that hierarchies exist everywhere and everything in various ways. But I don't see the patriarchy as the structure that's running things. I see it as an archetypal structure
Yeah.
that represents what can be good and what can be bad. So, I mean, we mentioned Jordan Peterson before. I first discovered him when he was talking about, he was engaging with women and having discussions about, patriarchy and men and women and the differences between them. And is there a patriarchy and are women oppressed? And I was really struck by the fact that in all of his conversations, he never said one thing that was so obvious to me as a gal with four brothers and having worked in all kinds of places with guys trying to get things done, which is that I do think that in creating the pecking order in any group of people who are know each other personally and are working together, men do it differently than women, and the way men do it is what women hate about the patriarchy.
Hmm.
Because men, if you're engaging the conversation with them, they're subconsciously, you're just like and you're a woman, you're just like the fattest and weakest guy in their subconscious brain. And so they're going to gang up with each other instinctively and just take you out, right?
Right.
It's not personal, and it's not that they hate
Sure.
women. They would do it to the emotional, the more emotional or the more sensitive or more, descriptive term using, chubby nerd in the room. That's all it is. But if you don't explain to women that I know men do this and it's horrible, they
Yeah.
never feel recognized. And you have to teach women tools for how to deal with that. And they're the tools we're talking about, which is that when guys are giving you shit or being a passive aggressive or ignoring you and then stating you have to say, hey guys, no, I said that first. No, don't interrupt me. I need to actually get that out again because you're ignoring that I said it earlier. You do have to be confident. You have to state yourself. You
Right.
have to be collegial and say, hey, I like that idea. And you just ignore that there's any weirdness happening towards you. And in a lot of circumstances, you can just break through it. If you're dealing with really sexist guys in a really crystallized structure,
Right. Good
I
luck.
don't know what to say. I think women should be entrepreneurs and they should start their own thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And bring in other women who can break through the passive aggressive henpecking order and be cooperative and collaborative together.
Well, it's interesting because so many people, in my experience, have this concept of patriarchy as just sort of like people with penises who run things, and I really,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's an
Well, let's
aspect
talk
to
about
it.
matriarchy too.
Yeah. Well, I just want to. What's interesting to me is that when I think of patriarchy, I'm certainly talking about these larger archetypal concepts.
Right.
I do think we can call this culture a patriarchy. It has to do with the relationship with logic in general in the culture, and then this kind of dominator style. I have the best argument, so I've won the debate, so I am at the top of the pecking order,
Hmm.
or whatever symbolism you want to use. That I have more money than you, so I'm at the top of the pecking order. But and even the hierarchical style, and I think. the
Well,
hierarchy
except for
that you
the
see in
fact that
corporate.
I wouldn't call the culture a patriarchy. I would say that there are patriarchal sort of structure. There are structures in which there is a male dominance hierarchy that are not as functional as they could be. But I wouldn't say the whole culture is a patriarchy. I mean, I think that we're moving into um, the embodiment of, in some ways, a malignant matriarchy. I mean, if
Right.
you think about it, what does the technocracy do? It's a hovering mother. It's a wear a mask, don't go outside, hide behind your Zoom, because the number one role of the mother is to make sure that you don't die, right? So all of this monitoring and surveilling, that's what the mom does. It always has one eye on the kid. So,
Sure.
and I even think that this, a lot of the de-emphasis of male and female of strongly delineated masculine and feminine personalities is because that there's an infantilization in that. You're supposedly, I mean, some people are, maybe, boys and girls are maybe more similar to each other before puberty, you know, and so
Sure.
there's like it, I think a lot of the stuff that people say about the non-binary, movement and transgenderism is it's comes from a place of frustration and sort of a non-sovereign lashing out, and not from a recognition that in this technocracy, it's really a hovering mom. It's really a hovering mom,
Yeah.
and it makes me think of Laurie Anderson. Laurie Anderson's songs about the what is the name of the one? It's got "Here Comes the Planes" in it. But anyway, I was listening to that Jane saying, "Yep, she predicted all of this. She predicted that when justice is gone, there's always mom, and she'll hold you in her arms, her military arms, her in her arms, literally arms, as in she'll protect you in her armaments, right?" So yeah, so Asian women now make more money than men in the U.S. And people are like, "Yay, that's so great!" And I'm like, "Okay, it's great that people can support themselves, that they can make money,
Yeah.
that people can achieve things and feel good about that." But I'm not. I'm not going to freak out about women having more or women having less. The question is, are they doing it within structures where they feel free or where they feel constrained? And do they have to be part of controlling structures in order to achieve?
Right.
Or, and what are the liberating structures that we could encourage to emerge?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that's been so fascinating to me about just watching this whole political movement around patriarchy evolve, and even a lot of the conversation about race that we have these days is where
Mm,
the assumption is that the current situation is sort of the preferred, that women are compared to men within the corporate hierarchy, and the solution is to get women to the top of the hierarchy, or
by
even,
being more male or something.
well, which is what ends up happening, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Whatever that means, or more masculine, or more classically masculine in their
right.
behavior.
Instead of, I mean, people are focusing too much on the gender of the person participating rather than the overall system, and like, what can we do to deconstruct this system and recreate something that's more or less alienating, more authenticating.
Right.
Oh,
Well, I do find it interesting that the countries that have the greatest economic parity between men and women, the women go after traditionally female, what used to be called pink collar,
mhm.
career roles, or choose not to have a career. They're stay-at-home moms and teachers and social workers, and I think that the pressure on women to do something other than the pink collar ghetto stuff, all of this pressure to be in the STEM fields, it's great if you're oriented in that way, but if you're not oriented in that way, it's just more pressure to be unsovereign. And the
Yeah.
shaming of women because they want to have kids and they want to stay home, and they want to pull out of the workforce for a period of time or start a business that they can do part-time, all of that needs to go away. And I do think that we're sort of like talking to each other, sort of like in a generational bubble, Doug, because I don't think that the kids in their 20s and their 30s, and even into the 40s, even, the late Gen Xers, I don't think that they feel that those patriarchal pressures are such a big deal anymore. I think that they feel like they can make choices and they can deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons why it's so interesting that they've become. I mean, I feel like there's actually has been a lot of progress made on a lot of these levels
Yeah,
in the last 30 or 40 years, which is why it almost shocks me that the news cycle is able to turn them into such huge issues.
I know. And the young kids are like, we're over
Right.
it. Race is not a thing for us. We don't, if we're attracted to, if we're white, and, if I'm white and I'm attracted to an Asian guy or woman or whatever, the race and gender and sexual preference stuff is actually not an issue for the younger generation in the way that the media makes it out to be.
Yeah.
They're just, the thing is, the reason why it's an issue is because the younger generations are pumped with this idea that, there's a bunch of really scary, bigoted, racist, and anti gender choice people sort of out in the hinterlands. All of them conservatives are just like racists and bigots. And
Yeah.
again, I don't find that that's true.
Yeah.
I do not find that that's true. I've never met a racist. I've never met anyone who, living out here, amongst the red types in Arizona and Colorado for now, 30 years. And yeah, people are annoyed about feeling that there's this big agenda being pushed to get their kids to choose to be something other than binary. And there's lots of different. I don't have kids. And I don't feel like it's valuable for me to wade into getting people to the table about that right now. I think we have other really big things that are affecting and oppressing all of us, like the central banking cartel.
Right.
You know, everyone's going to figure this out eventually, and then we can be, 10 different sexes and various places on the spectrum between submissive classic conservative Christian wife and CEO of a company that you started in the FEMA camp together.
Yeah,
We can have those
exactly.
conversations there.
Well, I mean, that's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation, really, is because there are these huge issues that are
Right.
happening and they've been happening. I mean, I was speaking before the interview about, I mean, as you mentioned, the central banking thing is the
Yeah.
biggest issue that nobody will talk about. It's like it's
So I have found a way to bring people together around that too, and that's
yeah,
the barter exchanges. So there's this wonderful barter exchange, community-exchange.org, and there's 1,200 or so community barter exchanges using this software all over the world.
nice.
And just recently in Colorado, in the last few months, we've formed 6 of them. And we have people starting to barter and communicate and exchange and starting to figure out, a community urban food forest together where you get together in your neighborhood and you're going to grow tomatoes and I have pear trees and I'm going to grow lettuce underneath them, to shade them from the sun. And this sort of sense that we can start to get an understanding of and get beyond the trauma of money that's privately controlled and where it's unstable for us, its value fluctuates and it loses value, so we're always being robbed by inflation. A
Right.
way to get beyond that is to do barter where the prices of things are stable.
Right.
You're always going to be able to trade if lettuce is worth X to you and it's always worth X to you, and a bike is always worth X to you, then it's always going to be, there's units of exchange, but those units exchange are always going to be over time, you know, um, end up being the equivalent of 100 heads of lettuce for that bicycle
Yeah.
or whatever it is. So although lettuce is really expensive now, I don't know, maybe it's 2 or 3 heads of lettuce for a bicycle.
Yeah.
Unless you're in Boulder County and you're driving a $500 car with a $15,000 bicycle on it, which
Yeah.
is very common. That's Boulder for you.
Yeah.
That's Colorado, period. And that's something that the old hippies love it, and it's the reduce, reuse, recycle, and it's the community potlucks,
Hmm.
and people with conservative fiscal values love it, and it just gets past all of the nonsense.
Yeah, yeah, it's so fascinating because that's just the thing. Like, I can't believe how divisive all of these issues have become. The race, the sexual identity, the
Yeah,
left-right paradigm, and it's really destroying any way to create a cohesive community that can
right,
move forward, given the challenges, the huge challenges that we're all facing right now. I mean, the serious threats. It's like, come on, people, we have to figure out how to move beyond this. And
right.
so finding ways that can actually just avoid those conversations.
So here's some unifying points that I use. Everyone agrees that the banks have too much power. Everyone agrees that BlackRock and Vanguard, which are
Yeah,
owned by the central banks, and then in turn the folks who are managing that, it's this like sort of cycle of ownership. It's sort of like one entity with the biggest central banks and then their member banks. It's this little club of people who sort of co-own everything. Most people agree that that's not a great thing. Most
sure.
people agree that having Vanguard and BlackRock buy up, I think they bought up in this last cycle in the last couple of years something like 10% of all of the available housing stock, and their intention is to turn that into rental stock, and they've pumped the prices up by doing this so insanely with that now young people are looking and going, I don't know how I'm going to be able to ever buy a house. So most people agree that that's terrible. Most people agree that big pharma and other corporations have way too much control over what's said in the media. So we have some places where we can start. People agree that their corporations have too much control. People agree that the military-industrial complex is out of control. And I mean, it used to be that you couldn't have that conversation with folks who were conservative.
Right.
Conservatives really get it. And that used to be the big talking point of the anti-war movement, sort of one of the big talking, points of the anti-war movement, going all the way back to Eisenhower's speech about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Beware the military-industrial complex. So those are places where you can start. Everybody loves food. Start a food co-op. Go out and meet with your local farmers. We're also doing that. Not ready to talk about it too much yet, but we're really excited about it.
Cool.
A local farmer food co-op. Start a barter exchange. It's free. And it's not a lot of work to be the administrator. People are joining buy nothing groups as a way of dealing with inflation and getting together. But whatever you do, meet in person, get to know each other in person and build that old-fashioned rural farm community network of I've got your back. And these values are not right or left. These are everyone's
Yeah.
values. I do think it's fascinating to have you looked at that analysis? I think I sent you the link to it. By somebody, I can't remember that person's name now, which talks about it's by an analyst in Boston who talks about, observes that there's now really not a sort of like blue team or a red team. It's more the virtuals versus the physicals.
Right.
Did you see that?
I don't think I did.
Really, really brilliant analysis. I'll
Uh-huh.
send it to you again. So then the question is, so do you want your life to be more and more, like virtual and low contact with people? So how can you do that in a way without imposing that on other people? Or do you want to get, you know, go back to your in-person yoga classes and join a walking group and have a garden and be really
Yeah.
more embodied in your physical? I think more and more people are saying, oh yeah, I want my physical plane existence to be better. I don't want to be sucked into and live in a virtual matrix. But just recognize where you are in that spectrum, and what do you hate and loathe and despise about people on the other side, and what are you projecting onto them? You
Yeah.
know? And just try different rubrics than just the left-right divide. You know? That's an interesting one to look at it and say, okay, what is the way that I'm repelled by people who spend all their time online? What does that tell me about me? You know, and am I lonely and I'm afraid that I can't have good relationships? I mean, I'm somebody who spends a lot of time online, and I'm always making stuff, and oftentimes I'm making stuff while I'm online, which is sort of like a combination of the two, like knitting or fixing something. Or like listening to something while I'm cooking. And I also have a huge garden, and I also dance, and I also work out in the in water every day. So being willing to stop thinking about the things that have been setting you about that annoying other side, and say, well, what are some other kind of analyses that I can use to understand what's happening?
Yeah.
It's not just rich and poor, black and white, bigots versus, transgender. It's those categories are not going to serve you as a thoughtful stoic who is trying to continue to grow and develop yourself emotionally and mentally. It serves much more to try different systems of understanding the world and just try them on for yourself.
Right. One of the things that I've been really thinking about, especially as I've been getting more into writing, is how much it's like people really want to find a system that works for everybody. When
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
reality, like everything happens on a case by case basis,
Right.
And everybody's different. And so there's no way to judge,
Right.
the virtue of one path or another, except in the individual instance where there was some kind of a conflict. And then maybe you have,
Right.
you intercede, or you have a justice system. What is justice? What is morality? It all kind of boils down to like a case by case basis. You can't just write a list of rules and expect it to work for everybody all the time.
Well, so for me, this is where Plato meets Aristotle, because in the Socratic method, that you're trying different points of view, and you're arguing them and seeing how far you can go to a logical conclusion. And Aristotle said, well, actually, there's systems for doing all this. There's ways that we can approach understanding the world. And so having a bunch of those different systems and being able to move fluidly between them means that you're not going to get stuck, and you don't have to come to a rigid logical conclusion ever. You can simply be exploring these different systems and exploring them with people until there's sort of like a communal, emotional sort of feeling of harmony, that
Right.
you did a process together, and that the other person isn't Satan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, that's
Or
the
if the
other
other
thing.
person is Satan, then maybe you understand Satan as, the person who goads you to be a better person because it's so miserable to be in that place of separatism.
Right.
That's a system. Right?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating to think about having, I would say, like, these complex systems or these self-organizing systems. That's another direction I've been thinking about a lot lately. Again, instead of if you want to use that word, patriarchy, where they're kind of like imposing their system on everybody because it's supposed to work perfectly for everyone.
Which
Because
the malignant technocratic matriarchy does too.
Yeah.
Everyone must have a vaccine pass. Everyone must, have a digital ID. Everyone must avoid talking about these subjects. It's just as oppressive.
It's
But it's
interesting.
oppressive in a way of limiting people's ability to like compete and be aggressive and to get ahead in the marketplace. It's sort of like pushing everyone down. Whereas in the patriarchy, the limitation was, sort of like might makes right. The biggest dog wins.
Right. You are listening to the first free hour of The Shift with Doug McKenty. For access to the full feature-length versions of the podcast, go to www.theshiftnow.com and subscribe for the audio version for just $6 a month. Access the full-length episodes in video form through rockfin.com by subscribing at the Shift with Doug McKenty landing page. For $9.99 a month, you gain access not only to the Shift, but also all other premium content material hosted on the platform. Find out more at www.theshiftnow.com/store. Detoxify your body, decolonize your mind, make the shift. Yeah. And even the ones, I mean, that's just it. Like, how do we heal the ones that are alienated and having these issues? Well, we heal them by giving them the freedom to feel empowered that their lives can make a difference. And so this is the kind of transition that I think definitely needs to happen. Like, just getting away from the over systematized Agenda 21s, Agenda 30s, the public-private partnerships, the old school way of getting the federal grants, because these are all ultimately, they've always been just methodologies of control. Even if they sound good, they actually don't allow your community to grow in an authentic way. They're still imposing these. I
want to say something else about Colorado, which is just a test bed for a lot of these really horrible ideas.
Yeah.
Colorado, when I found out that Colorado is sort of like the Delaware of cooperative business structures, I was like, oh, that's really awesome. It's so progressive, and there's all these. Turns out that they are rolling out structures like an LLC that allows you to be a cooperative where everyone's an owner, but where you can bring in investor money and they can suck off of the profits of your co-op forever.
Right.
They have just decided, we didn't talk about the social impact bonds and people who are, and that the WEFers have decided that in the future, the truly the billionaires will be people-naires. They'll have the most people in their portfolio that they're betting for or against and making money off of, because we've allowed them into our lives by having them be owners and therefore trackers and controllers of our business that we own, our cooperative, or they, they're the ones who are funding the social services that are giving us the WIC food stamps and the bonuses if we, only buy certain things that are tracked in our app that reads everything in the store, and so that they know, oh, she's in the Snickers aisle, we better beep her phone.
Right.
The people in theirs are supposed going to be, this is all the stuff that I think Allison has done Allison McDowell has done an amazing job of tracking and just raising the alarm about. So the movement forward is to recognize that there's insidious fingers worked out very methodically over the 50 years of the WEF's existence into every aspect of life to try and get that control finger and that surveillance finger into everything: education, entrepreneuring, healthcare, social services, wearable clothing that is is wired and talks to your internet, ID, digital ID, and that a lot of the good ideas that these things have suffocated need to just be are intending to to be suffocated by this overwhelming network of control. We just have to find ways individually in each little way that we can to pull ourselves out of that.
Yeah. Well, sounds good, Mary. Thanks for coming on and explaining all of this for us. And it was really fun and good
discussing. Yeah, it was really fun to talk about it with you. And I am optimistic, and I really appreciate your having this conversation. I'm curious to see what what rises to the surface for your listeners and for your audience.
Yeah, for sure.
Quite an interesting group of people. So.
Well, I hope if more, I guess one of the things, just to really conclude, is with the idea of sovereign communication again, is that if we engage in this kind of sovereign communication, I think that these ideas that we're talking about, these individuating concepts, this sort of breaking away from the machine, the controlling machine, and learning to grow these good ideas in our community level, this is the stuff that's going to become the obvious path forward. Like, once we help each other to use the critical thinking, and and recover from the traumas and the triggers,
Yep.
then suddenly we're all just going to find actually we agree. Let's take this plot of land and let's turn it into something wonderful for our community, and let's just
Yep.
ignore the pressures from the controllers that are trying to force us into a tiny box that doesn't fit.
Thank you, Doug. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this when I'm feeling discouraged.
No, it was awesome. Thank you, Mary. Is there any do you want me to point anybody in a certain direction to find out more about your
Well,
work
I
that
wish
you're
I was
doing,
to the point where I was offering any. I mean, I've been in a process of self-discovery for some years, and I'm not teaching any classes or anything coming up, but people should definitely check out community-exchange.org
Okay.
and just start your own local barter system. I mean, you can do it as a free cycle or as a buy nothing group that isn't on Facebook. It's independent. Your data is not going to be shared. It doesn't cost anything to start your exchange. Community-exchange.org, and the people there are, as I said, they're across the spectrum and all coming together around the basics of the currency of our communication with ourselves and with the natural world, and it's a great place to start.
Yeah, sounds perfect. I'll help promote that with this episode then.
All right, thanks so much, Doug.
Sure thing. And I'll let you all know that you've been listening to The Shift, and I'm your host, Doug McKenty. You can find all my stuff at www.theshiftnow.com. I've been writing more and more, trying to put a weekly essay out on the blog, The Populist Papers, on Substack. You can find all the video stuff on Rockfin, Odyssey, and YouTube. I've been pointing people more to the Odyssey channel. If you subscribe to Rockfin, you can get access to all the full-length versions of each episode of The Shift. My personal page, Doug McKenty, on Facebook is kind of where I spend most of my time, though I'd love to branch out to a different social media site, and I am at DMcKenty on Twitter. You can join me there too if you want to have more direct conversations with me about the episodes and keep in touch with what's going on. So thanks everybody for listening, and thank you, Mary, for coming on and doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.
For sure. This sovereign communication idea is just so clutch, and we have to learn how to talk to each other if we're going to get over the hump and start being more productive and more individuated as people and communities to get away from what they got planned for us. So,
indeed.
All right. Thanks again. Take care.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was my conversation with Mary Lin. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I was first approached by her on Facebook when she responded to one of my postings of on unity, which I wrote for the Populist Papers on Substack to describe the importance of trying to unify our whole scene. In my opinion, there are so few of us that are really even able to see through a lot of the propaganda in the mainstream media. And so those of us who can, I think it's imperative that we get together and we work together towards making some kind of substantial change. And I think if there's a lot of conflict going on within the independent community, there's just no chance, no hope. And that's a pretty bleak way of looking at the future. So in my attempts to foster unity, I published this series about just discovering that the left-right paradigm still exists really within our scene and trying to overcome it. I've been working, as a lot of you may know, towards trying to find some kind of compromise, some kind of understanding between the left-right paradigm where we can just move past this, start looking at things in terms of a top-down paradigm, which I think is way more accurate, that there are just very wealthy people who actually use the left-right paradigm to divide and conquer the rest of us so that they can continue to go on with all sorts of social engineering plans, centralizing the means of production, accumulating vast amounts of power and wealth at the top of the hierarchy, and really disempowering those of us, the rest of us, the 99% at the bottom. And so trying to overcome this, I wrote this series on unity. And of course, it was about this conflict in the independent media. You can go to Substack and read that series if you like, and that'll go into detail about exactly what the conflict was. But the bottom line was that, of course, I took one side over another, and I was getting a lot of these disparaging comments from the people that were on the other side. And Mary happened to be one of them. She disagreed. She was on the quote unquote other side, but her response to me was very open-minded, very non-judgmental, and inviting more in-depth dialogue, which is what was really important to me. I mean, that was the point of writing the whole essay, was to just get more good conversation happening, rather than shutting down and avoiding the kind of conversations that need to happen so that we can overcome a lot of this divisiveness. And I just actually wrote her back on Facebook saying, thank you so much for your response. I mean, it was just so refreshing to get someone that was like so open-minded, even though there was clearly this disagreement going on. So we had a phone conversation, and we were just able to get into such detail and such depth about the importance of having good communication techniques. And she started to describe to me how this sovereign communication process really can work. And I was so impressed with it that I invited her on the show so we could have a conversation and we could share these ideas with the rest of you. I think that this kind of conversation, understanding this, and I'd also like to add that I wrote another post on Substack at the Populist Papers called Dialectic and Dialogue to talk about the difference in the kind of ways that we use logic. One way being dialectic, which claims to have discovered the truth. The other way being dialogue, which is in conversation with others, we can help to rise above our own preconceived notions. We can help each other to become stronger individuals. I mentioned in that essay the concept of Stoicism, which Mary also has been heavily influenced by the Stoic movement. This ability to be able to respond in conversation without these ad hominem attacks. I mean, if we have disagreements, this is what I was getting all over social media. Ad hominem attacks, building straw men that had nothing to do with my argument, but trying to paint me as some kind of horrible person from those that were on the other side. When you run into this kind of thing, these people have been emotionally triggered. They're no longer able to follow a conversation and utilize the logical fallacies. When you see that you've made a logical fallacy, you're no longer engaging in sovereign communication. You've been triggered. Triggered because your paradigm has been threatened. Or perhaps in the case of the dominant propaganda that people are getting, if you doubt someone's very trusted news source, for example, someone who loves CNN or NPR, and you start saying, well, I don't think that NPR piece was very accurate. Let's look at the facts. And then they get triggered and they start, saying, well, all intelligent people know that NPR is the best news source, or whatever it is, whatever that response is. You've got to be like, okay, I'm dealing with this emotional response. This person is no longer engaging in a logical conversation. At the same time, it asks you to be very unattached to your point of view. I mean, if somebody is following the discipline of a logical discourse, you've got to be able to say, wow, I hadn't thought of that. I'm able to change with this new information or this new concept that you've just introduced into the conversation. So you've got to be open-minded, you've got to be non-judgmental, and then dialogue becomes a path towards character development. And this is what the Stoic movement was all about. You become a stronger person, less emotionally influenced, less. They would call it unvirtuous behavior when you get triggered and then you get angry or you respond violently or incoherently to a concept that is outside of your paradigm that you haven't been able to incorporate into your worldview, and you get scared. People get scared. They have this paradigm that is their reality, and when you knock on that reality, it frightens them. That's when you get these triggered reactions. And trying to overcome that is just a huge part of, I think, what we're all dealing with. I mean, right now we've got this Ukraine situation, and I'm finding that 99% of the people I'm seeing on social media have no concept of the last 10 years of Ukrainian history, and they're just lashing out against Russia, against Putin, against the evil, no justification for any kind of invasion of the Ukraine. And it's just like, okay, let's look at the facts. Let's look at our primary source material. Mary and I talk about in our interview the trivium, and I would encourage all of you to look up the trivium, the quadrivium. These are ancient techniques, actually Roman, going back to classical Greek and Roman concepts, where you'll see the logical fallacies listed. And they have these concepts of how to engage in logical discourse. And you have to have a lot of discipline, but when you break out of that trivium method, it's called, then you see somebody's been emotionally triggered in this conversation. We have to heal the emotional wound before we can move forward with the logical discourse. And so, what I love about the process is not only can it help to wake people up, but it also, it not only makes people intellectually stronger, more aware human beings, but it's designed also to heal those emotional wounds that all of us have. We've all been traumatized, having been raised either within the patriarchal culture, where authoritarianism, especially authoritarian pedagogies, are used on us from a very young age, or we've been raised in an indigenous culture, which clearly have been persecuted by the colonizing culture for hundreds of years now. So there's a lot of emotional healing that needs to be done. And hopefully this concept of sovereign communication can give us a tool that we can use to engage not only in explaining to people what's going on in the world around us, but also provide the tools necessary to help heal those emotional wounds that we've all endured as a result of the generational trauma of colonization that has been going on now for thousands of years in some cases, depending on your family history. So I was really excited to have this conversation with Mary, and I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I think it's a useful tool going forward for all of you who are frustrated trying to have conversations with those who are simply listening to the mainstream media or listening to their politicians. And at this point, like I said with the Ukraine thing, after coming off of the coronavirus thing, it's like, it can be very, very frustrating. So this methodology provides a system of overcoming it, having compassion for those who are trapped inside of the mainstream system, and helping to heal everyone involved through this kind of conscious dialogue process. So I'll just let you know one more time that Mary, she doesn't have a website up. I hope that she does, and I'll try to keep you guys updated if she does actually start to teach this sovereign communication thing. But for now, she asks that people go and sign up for this community exchange project that she's been involved in, which is trading talent hours instead of dollars to help provide a parallel system to get us outside of this constant rat race of the dollar system and the fractional reserve system. So go check that out at www.community-exchange.org. And you can sign up there. You can either find others in your area that are involved, or you could sign up to set up your own node in the network where you live. So I'll urge everyone to check that out again at www.community-exchange.org. And I'll just let everyone know that you can find all of my stuff at www.theshiftnow.com. And I'm also, as many of you know now, writing a blog on Substack called The Populist Papers, so you can check out my work there. You can also just find the link to the blog on the homepage at the website. My next interview is going to be about a targeted individual, and that should be an interesting one as well. That's kind of a difficult topic to really latch onto, because the people who are targeted often appear to be kind of, they appear to be paranoid or schizophrenic, and they're constantly fighting this uphill battle trying to prove that they've actually been targeted by some organization that's messing with their minds. So that will be an interesting conversation, and I'll have that one up soon. You can also see that I have moved. I'm now living in Iowa. That's why I've been a few weeks late getting this one out. So thank you all for your patience, and I promise that as the month of March moves forward, I'll be getting more and more content out in a more timely manner. Okay, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Take care.